It gives me great pleasure to now introduce our commencement speaker, John Hall. John Hall has had 30 years of business experience, including C-level and board positions in family businesses, as well as private and public companies, providing executive leadership, strategic direction, and operation and financial management. He is currently the President and Chief Operating Officer of Watch Entertainment, Inc., which is the holding company for Rachel Ray that manages all of her media, merchandise, and philanthropic activities. He sits on the board of City Harvest and is a member of the University of Vermont School of Business Board of Advisors. John holds an MBA from Columbia Business School and, more importantly, a Bachelor of Science in Business from University of Vermont. He resides in New York, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome John Hall.
Thank you very much. It is fantastic to be here today, and I think Dean Sharma is about to learn one thing, which is it can sometimes be dangerous if you yield the microphone to me. So with apologies to the photographers and videographers, could we bring the house lights up a little bit? On such a happy occasion, we should all be seeing each other a little bit more. It's kind of dark down there, right? Can we bring those lights up? In the house lights up. Okay. Well, clearly my leadership skills are being questioned, and you should all be having another speaker at this point. Let me first start by thanking all of you for coming today. Thank you most and foremost to the parents, the step-parents, the family, the loved ones of all of our graduates. Thank you for getting them here. Please give all of them a round of applause from yourselves. And I'd like to thank Dean Sharma, the faculty, and the staff of the business school. But I'm actually here today because of two deans, Dean Sharma and Dean Snyder. It's because of the relationship that Dean Snyder built with me over the years that brought me back to being much more active with UVM. It was 29 years ago. That was the last time that I was in this building when I was graduating in 1985. And it's the value of relationships that I'll talk about in a moment that both of those two deans really helped bring me back here, and it's incredibly rewarding to be so involved with the school again. So what I thought I would do is give you a snapshot of my time since graduation so you might have some context for my comments this morning. And I've been very lucky, as Dean Sharma said. I've had 3 different careers. My first years after college, I was a commercial banker, and I had the great luck of being part of a training program in an organization called Manufacturers Hanover Trust, which got bought by an organization called Chemical, which got bought by an organization called Chase, which is now part of JP Morgan Chase. I was very lucky because, as many of you may not know, we have a lot in common, because in 1985, it was a pretty tough job market. There was a recession in the early 1980s. It was pretty brutal. Mullets, the music, shoulder pads, polo cologne, those were not the only brutal things about the 1980s. That recession was so bad it laid the groundwork for a Latin American debt crisis. It laid the groundwork for an S&L crisis. 2/3 of all the S&Ls in the country closed. You've heard about bank closings. Does that sound familiar? We also graduated to a whole bunch of generational clash. We'd done nothing to earn it, but like you, we were sort of the tail end of a generation. For us, it was the dreaded baby boomers. For the people ahead of us, they decided they'd start calling us things like yuppies. And so as you're going out to the world and you think about what people might have for preconceived ideas about millennials, you know the way that we know they're not all true, they're not accurate, and what's actually going to happen is you're going to kick the butt of all those other generations as soon as you get out there, and they're just a little bit jealous about how much youth and vigor and energy you still have. So that's what was going on in the first 8 years. I was very fortunate to build some good relationships, and another recession came along in the early 1990s. And the whole time that I was in that first 8 years, I was working with media companies to focus on consumers, consumer-branded experiences through media, delivering an audience being able to deliver an advertising impression. But in the early 90s, there was an advertising recession. So a lot of the companies that I had lent money to had trouble servicing their debt. Fortunately, I had a pretty good relationship with the people in the restructuring group, and I was able to be recruited into that group, and that was really my first career change. So as a part of that group, instead of giving money out, I had to get money back. But I had the good fortune, again, of being able to hire a service provider to help us value the library of a film studio. I got to know those two gentlemen who were the partners of the firm, and when the cycle changed because the economy improved, I had the opportunity to make a career change from commercial banking into investment banking. And while I was an investment banker for the next 8 years in a family-owned and operated business, which was quite uncommon in that industry, again, I learned about relationships. I learned about the value of your client relationships, and I learned about the value of the consumer relationship to any business. And the businesses that we served were primarily in media, consumer technology, and consumer branded businesses. And that's where my third career change happened, where the category of be careful what you wish for because it might come true happens. I wanted to become an operator. I didn't want to be the person that said, you should do this or you should do that. I didn't want to just provide capital, I wanted to actually run a business. And someone gave me the opportunity to do that. And the category of be careful what you wish for because it might come true is it was a busted company. It was the first company that we had provided outside capital to in a particular industry, but it was having trouble. It was the late 1990s. They made a lot of acquisitions, and things weren't going quite as well as they would have hoped. The chairman said, if you'd like to be an operator, come, be the CEO of this company. I'll teach you how. If you can figure out how to fix it, you've got a company to run. If you can't, you're a banker, so you'll be able to sell it. The good news was, the offer was good. I moved, I started the new job. I applied all of my analyze an industry quickly, figure out what's going on in the business quickly from my banking and investment banking background, and came back after 3 months and got to tell the board of directors, we're toast. We're not going to be able to turn this around. We're going to have to sell it. That's where diligence comes in. The small problem was, some of the people who were the founding investors in the company had levered their stock. It was the late 1990s. And part of what was driving the stock market at that time was, you took the stock gains that you had in one security, borrowed against them, and invested them in your next security. So we didn't have the ability to do what we probably needed to do, which was put the company into bankruptcy, restructure it, and bring it back out because it would have created a cascade of other debt going bad. Again, does that sound familiar to anything you might have heard about recently? So for the next 2.5 years, along with a colleague, we contracted the business, we sold it off in pieces, we contracted it again, we sold it again, and then ultimately we got everything done. And we did have to put the company into bankruptcy in order to clean it up. But what we learned, quite ironically, was for those next 2 years, we were going to be working for the banks that had provided capital. So that's a quick snapshot, but essentially what I really want to make sure that you're understanding for the context is everything I'm going to share with you next is about branded consumer businesses. And everything that I've been studying for the past 5 years or so has been about you. You are the future of pretty much every branded consumer business, and you're the immediate future. How do we know that? You're the biggest generation to come after us, the baby boomers. You're the largest concentration of people of your age. You not only believe you can change the world, but you're going to change the world. How are you going to do that? Through your beliefs, through your values, and the way you behave. I want to share with you a couple of trends that I think are very important for you to know about before you get out there to the real world, because I'm kind of the guy standing between you, your diploma, and the real world right now. And the first trend that I really would like you to know about and get as smart as possible about, it's a technology trend. You might be reading about a lot of them now. It's not big data. It's not the cloud. It's not data visualization. It's not 3D printing. It's not drones, although drones are pretty cool. It's in your hand. It's mobile, or as we call it, mobile apps, mobile databases, mobile devices. Why is it important? It's a global trend. Right now, there are about 1.75 billion of these bad boys being used on the planet. In the next 5 years, the estimate is that goes to 6 billion. That's 4 times the growth rate in the next 5 years as the past 5 years. And those of us that didn't have jobs at graduation like me, where do you go looking for a job? Where there's growth. That's an incredible amount of growth. And what's the best news about that for all of you? You are already experts in this. I look out at you and I see 152 people I want to take back to New York, put you all in one big room, and help me figure out how do we take traditional media, how do we take traditional advertising, how do we take traditional marketing, and turn it into a mobile experience. You're already doing it. You're changing the world. This year, in 2014, was the first time that the entire population accessing the internet through a mobile connected device was greater than the population accessing an internet through a laptop or desktop. And you guys don't even use desktops, so you know it's basically laptop or mobile. Well, we're now waking up in a post-PC world. When I was coming to college, the question was whether or not you would have access to a computer lab. When I got out of college and went to work, the question was whether you would have your own computer. Now there's going to be 6 billion people on the planet who are walking around with a computer in their hand. And for consumer businesses, that's a huge and important shift. Because no longer will we have to rely upon surveys. There'll be actual data that measures what you actually did right now. How many of you were paying attention to me? How many of you were texting? How many were buying something? How many of you were maybe applying for a job right now? How many of you are telling your parents, I'm going to blow off lunch and go with my friends, I'll see you later at dinner? That's a huge and significant shift. And you're already an expert in it. Just innately, you know how it works. So that's one technology trend that I'd really like you to know about. Get as smart as possible on it, as fast as possible, and you'll impress everybody at your new job or wherever you want to go next. And it really doesn't matter what part of business you're in. It doesn't matter if you're in sales or marketing or accounting or finance or HR. It's going to change all of it. Congratulations. You're graduating as experts, and you're graduating into the real world that the tables are turned. We're trying to figure it out. So please help us. Please help us quickly. Explain the secrets. There's another series of trends that I'd like you to know about. You're probably familiar that it is a tough environment out there in business. I get my butt kicked in it every day. But always, even in tough economies, there's growth. And people are investing for growth. So when you look for new opportunities, or if you're looking for your first opportunity, how do you know where to look? How do you know where the growth is? Well, there's a couple of telltale signs. The people who are professional investors, think of maybe venture capitalists or merchant banks, love to brag about what they invested in. So they write about it, and they talk about it. They talk about it in articles, they talk about it in blog posts, they talk about it in social media. Look for the industries, the types of businesses, or the products that you're interested in, and those people will be telling you through all that activity where the growth is. Another way to watch is for company announcements, executives that need to make strategic investments. When you're up here making the investments, you'll be needing to tell the world about it. So you'll be writing articles, you'll be writing blog posts, you'll be on social media, maybe a bit less if you're a public company. That's where you can start your focus. So read. Don't stop reading, start reading. And don't just focus on BuzzFeed or Mashable or Vox. Those are fun and they have some good information. Don't forget about the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the BBC. You can find all of that on Twitter. You don't necessarily have to go and get a ton of expensive subscriptions. Follow the journalists. They're looking to have a direct connection with an audience like you. What you're going to see as you continue reading is there's going to be 3 patterns. And I'm going to sound like a venture capitalist here for a minute, but there's 3 things that if you take away from this, I'd really like you to focus on for finding opportunities. 3 types of businesses. The first is a business that has a network effect. What's a network effect? If you haven't studied it, it basically means the value of the network or the value of the business is a function of how many customers are in it. The more customers, the more valuable. Think about WhatsApp. Everybody know what that is, right? How much was it sold for? $19 billion for a company that was only a few years old. It had 450 million users at the time of the acquisition announcement by Facebook. Guess how much it spent on sales and marketing? Nothing. 0. A network effect lets each customer bring the new customer in. How do you guys all learn about something new and interesting, something you're curious about? You hear about it from each other. That direct connection between consumers and a network, that is where there's an incredible amount of growth. Focus on that, read about that, there'll be opportunities. And again, it doesn't matter what functional area you're interested in, and it doesn't matter what your particular product or industry is, it will happen. Second is a type of company that we're all calling now marketplaces, but they're third-party marketplaces. So think of Amazon, think about eBay, think about what they built where there are third-party merchants, kind of like a mall on a virtual basis, that are coming together and selling directly to consumers. The people that host that have created these massive marketplaces that are growing. Right now, it's less than 20% of the total retail economy, that's e-commerce, but it's growing incredibly quickly. And when you add in mobile, over half of e-commerce interactions and transactions are beginning to be initiated through mobile. Marketplaces. Now, before I really sound like a VC and I'm saying go out and only work for young, cool companies, that's not the only place where you're going to find opportunities. The old, they're less sexy, not so much cool all the time, traditional businesses, they have the same opportunities, but also the same challenges. They need your minds even more than the young companies where everyone in the world is competing there. Think about some companies like Walmart, the largest consumer business on the planet, investing heavily in e-commerce, investing heavily in a third-party marketplace. Guess who else has one? Sears. So does Best Buy. So does Staples. Experience at any one of these businesses will help you acquire the skills that you can take anywhere you want. And if you do have an interest in going to a cool, young, sexy company, you'll be able to take the experience from one of those older businesses there. That's what we spend half our time talking about now, is how do we take our existing businesses, protect the existing revenue stream, find capital to invest in the new model of business, and not destroy the existing earnings. If you're working in a traditional business, I'd suggest to you that you'd actually have a better experience profile there than going to a cool young startup that doesn't have to worry about protecting an existing line of business. And the last trend in terms of business models I'd like to talk to you about are the ones you know best. You created it. It's a fancy word in business, they call them platforms, but it's a social media network. You all know how that works, I don't have to list them for you, and I'm sure you'd all love to have the benefit of being able to work at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, any of those. You don't necessarily have to look for one of those types of opportunities only at one of those companies. There's an entire industry that provides services to the other companies I talked about, to companies like mine, advertising agencies, PR agencies, communications firms, couponing companies. They all want to activate through social platforms as well. They need you. They need your minds. They need your innate expertise to be able to execute those platforms. So those are places you can look for opportunities as well. And again, it doesn't really matter what functional area you're interested in. You're all going to find opportunities there. So having gone through that, I also realized that I wanted to share with you today some things that I've kind of had a little thunder stolen from. They used to tell you in show business, don't follow small children or animals. But basically, President Sullivan took about a third of my speech when he was talking about true grit this morning. I don't know how many of you went to the overall commencement ceremony. But I'm going to keep it really short since he took most of that, with pleasure. Among all the things that you're going to want to be aware of to be successful, I'm going to give you one piece of bad news. Your specific academic credentials, where you're going next, don't mean anything. Bad news, your GPA, your IQ, your SATs, if you've taken them yet, your GREs, your LSATs, your GMATs, in and of themselves, they don't mean anything. So before I get tomatoes thrown at me from the people behind me, what does? Your social intelligence. And by that, I don't mean how good you are at beer pong or Game of Thrones drinking. I mean, how well can you read a room? Can you walk into a room of strangers and after an hour figure out who are the hard workers? Who are the flakes? Who's got integrity? Who's just a showboat? Who can you rely upon in a hard situation? The relationships you've developed while you've been here, all of that is what's going to equip you the most for where you're going. And among all the different things that you might look for in successful people, that you might look for as role models, I'll pose this one as a BuzzFeed type of post. What do Mark Zuckerberg, the Olsen twins, Steve Jobs, and Betty White all have in common? 3 things: adaptability, stamina, and relationships. If you've got all 3 of those, you're golden. You've won Powerball. If you don't have that much stamina as you might like right now, good news, you're at the time of your life where it's perfect to develop it. Relationships are key. If you were at the general commencement this morning, you heard that it was the relationship between the mayor of Burlington and the ambassador that brought Ambassador Power here today. Those are the kind of relationships that matter. You heard one of your peers talk about how you'll always have UVM as something that'll be something in common. But I gotta call you out on one thing, and this is the old world in terms of survey technology. I sent out a survey through the business school to about all 150 of you, and of those people that replied, half of you indicated that you had 20 or fewer of your fellow graduates in your contact list. That's a missed opportunity. So I'm not going to stand up here and finger wag. Instead, I'm going to do something that is one of those times in life where you just got to say, I'm going to ask for forgiveness instead of permission. So what I'd like to ask you all to do is stand up, all our graduates. How many of you have your phone? Everybody or nobody? All right. You got your phones? Take them out. Do you know the 4 to 5 people immediately around you? Take a picture. Everybody take a picture with at least 5 people in it. And if you don't know them, make sure you get their contact. And I'm going to take a picture of the whole class. And if you graduate and you don't have the names of all of your fellow classmates in your contacts, it's just a missed opportunity because they might be helpful to you and you never know when that might be. So come on, get the pictures going. It's a timed exercise. So one of the other things that I'm going to share before I close is, I wish when I was sitting where you were 29 years ago, that I knew how to find somebody who could be a mentor, who could share with me how not to get into trouble, which actually happened to me 2 weeks on the job. As I mentioned, I had a long job search. I graduated without a job. But in June of 1985, I got an offer. I started 2 weeks later. And 2 weeks later, I almost got fired. Why? I wasn't adapting. I was completely clueless and naive to what the real social structure and power structure was of the group that I joined within a bank. Somebody that wasn't my boss came and asked me to work on a project. He was the top dog in new business development. I didn't understand that. I told him I was too busy because my boss had loaded me up with work, so I thought I was practicing good time management. I walked out of his office, he picked up the phone, called my boss and said, "Fire him." Fortunately, my boss was a nice guy, convinced him I was too green to do that, gave me some coaching, and I spent the next 2 years focusing on stamina, working my butt off to redeem myself to that VP. Never happened. But the SVP noticed. And at the end of that 2-year period when I was working my butt off to try to redeem myself, I was offered a promotion to Atlanta, where I didn't want to live. Because I developed a good relationship with that boss and his boss, they were kind enough to help me find an opportunity in a different part of the bank that was going to allow me to stay in New York. That was the media group. If I hadn't maintained that relationship, if I hadn't worked hard, if I hadn't had that stamina and had someone to help me figure out a tough situation, I wouldn't have gotten that first transfer, I wouldn't have gotten that first promotion, I wouldn't have had the career I just described for you, and I wouldn't be back up here today. Because I can answer one question that was asked of me a few years ago when I started getting involved in the university again, and it was by Rocky. She said, "How do we miss you? How'd you get by us for all those years?" And I didn't answer her then, but I'll answer her now the way that I should have. Did you check my GPA? It wasn't that great. So that's my story for how not to be a cautionary tale. And everything you do here is important. Everything you've learned is fantastic. The smarts really do matter, but what you're going to learn socially, and it does help to have a coach, matters too. So since you all know social media, and I've got a few years of experience on you, I'm happy to make an offer. If you'd like to make a LinkedIn group for the UVM BizAd 2014 graduates, I'd be happy to be part of it, and I would be happy to become your unofficial mentor, sponsor, coach, and helper in any way that I can from now until the rest of your careers, which will last longer than mine. But in any way that I can be helpful, I would like to. So if that would make sense to you. And just, by the way, along the way, I did pick up a graduate degree at another school that wears baby blue, but I figured I'd rather wear green today. Because another thing that's kind of interesting is once you get out there in the real world, there are a few very elite graduate schools that make it clear, you always know it when you meet somebody from one of those graduate schools. I don't know what kind of brainwashing they do, but it's the first thing you learn about somebody within the first 3 minutes. It doesn't matter if they're 40 or 80. But the minute you find out you meet somebody else who went to UVM, or they know someone who went to UVM, it's like a whole world and a whole other door opens. So if you'll indulge me for one more minute, I want to share one last piece of advice, and I don't want to sound like one of your parents. I'm not a parent myself, but I do like to pretend that I'm the cool uncle to my nieces and nephews. You are all digital natives. And I'll tell you sort of a background secret. In case you haven't figured out, I'm gay, my partner Michael is right there. I came out in between my second 2 jobs. Middle-aged gay men and millennials, we have so much in common, it's amazing. No idea why. So, here's one thing that we've learned. We've experimented with a lot of the social networks you are, and we experimented with a lot of the digital interactions. And I'm going to use something visual. I don't know if everyone's seen it, I hope you have. But has everyone seen the Lacoste video that was released around the Sochi Olympics? It was called The Big Leap. It's a couple on a first date. There's some nodding heads. It's incredibly well done. And it uses the metaphor of a young man running bare-chested and barefoot, of course looking incredibly attractive, across the top of a very tall building that's enshrouded in mist. And it's a metaphor for him leaning in for what appears to be the first kiss on a first date. And they're in a cafe in one scene, and they're having tea, so they must either be in Europe or Williamsburg, Brooklyn, because they're too cool to have coffee. And he's hesitant, he's not sure, he makes eye contact, she breaks eye contact, he takes her hand, she pulls it away, you don't know what's gonna happen. They cut back and forth between him about to jump off the building. Finally, he leaps off the edge of the building, leans in, kisses her, and there's this moment of suspended gravity, suspended animation. It's done so incredibly well, you feel as if you're there. But you're not. And so digital natives, please remember, no matter how amazing your technology today is and will become, there's no substitute for the real thing. Don't forget to take someone's hand in the real world. Don't forget to take that risk. Find somebody special. They might stomp your heart once or twice. Let it happen. So, in closing, I'm not saying that we should all bail on whatever you have next. Head on over to Red Rocks, strap on a GoPro, and jump off a cliff together. I'm just saying I'm glad I did when I had the chance. So thank you, congratulations, and enjoy the rest of the summer.